Islam, as one of the three major world religions, exerts profound influence globally. However, certain teachings and regulations within Islam can sometimes appear perplexing. For instance, pork is one of the most widely consumed meats worldwide today, yet Islam strictly prohibits Muslims from eating it. Anyone who consumes pork is considered to have violated their faith. Why does this rule exist? Is it purely a matter of faith? Some believe that the prohibition of pork in Islam stems from concerns about parasites and disease transmission. Others suggest that raising pigs was unsuitable for the desert environment of the Arabian Peninsula. Still, others argue that pork is forbidden because Allah described pigs as filthy, impure, and shameless. The taboo against eating pork is more than a dietary restriction. It has deep historical and cultural roots. Simply put, in ancient Semitic times, avoiding pork was a lifestyle defense for nomadic peoples against agricultural societies. During the Hebrew era, it became a cultural defense against the Egyptians. By the time of the Arabs, it evolved into a test of obedience within Islam. Behind this prohibition lies a story spanning 3 millennia of monotheistic evolution. Let us start with the ancient Semites. In the 20th century BC, a nomadic people known as the Semites emerged between the Arabian Peninsula and the Syrian desert. They roamed between ancient Egypt and Babylon, with one group frequently raiding Babylonian territories. The Babylonians referred to them as the Habiru, meaning those who lived on the border between agricultural and nomadic zones and conducted periodic raids. This group, known as the Habiru, is better recognized today as the Hebrews. Around 1300 BC, a prophet named Moses emerged among the Hebrews. Under his leadership, the Hebrews returned to their promised land, Canaan. To ensure their survival, Moses introduced a strict set of laws known as the 10 Commandments and established a centralized structure combining military, political, and religious leadership, the 12 tribes of Israel. It was in this wartime context that the monotheistic religion of Judaism was formally born. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace their origins to the same patriarch, Abraham, and are collectively referred to as the Abrahamic religions. Among these three faiths, the prohibition against eating pork did not originate with Islam but with Judaism. Judaism has a detailed system of dietary laws known as kashrut, meaning dietary law. It is essential to understand this point, as Islam's dietary restrictions are, in fact, derived from kashrut. Kashrut is broadly divided into 3 categories. The first is human restrictions. Only a certified shocheh, a butcher qualified under Jewish law, is allowed to slaughter animals. This certification requires official registration and examination by religious authorities, and no one without a rabbinical license may practice. The second category involves method restrictions. For example, the ritual slaughter law, shechita, requires a swift and precise cut to ensure a humane death. Additionally, during cooking, if even a drop of blood spills, permission from a rabbi must be sought before proceeding. The third category addresses food restrictions. In Jewish dietary law, foods are classified as clean or unclean. The Bible, specifically in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, conveys divine commands. Anything deemed unclean is not to be eaten or touched. Moses' 10 Commandments further codified these rules into 5 prohibitions, which include no consumption of animal blood, no consumption of animals that died naturally, no consumption of pigs, rabbits, horses, ostriches, turtles, snakes, and similar creatures. Pigs were prominently listed among the prohibited animals, but at that time they were simply one of many forbidden options, not uniquely singled out. It wasn't until the advent of Islam that pigs became particularly significant within religious dietary laws. Now let's turn to the Arabs. While the Hebrews were departing Egypt, another branch of the Semitic people, the Arabs, remained in the tribal and often violent era of blood feuds. It wasn't until the 7th century AD, when Muhammad founded Islam, that the Arab world entered a new phase of civilization. Islam, derived from Judaism, retains striking similarities to Jewish dietary laws, or kashrut, and can even be considered an enhanced version. Like kashrut, Islamic dietary laws are also divided into 3 layers. The first layer concerns people. Islam designates specific individuals to slaughter animals, often imams or their students from local mosques. The second layer focuses on methods. The Islamic ritual slaughter, called zabiha, closely resembles the Jewish shechita, requiring a swift and precise cut to the throat. The third layer addresses food itself. Islam classifies food into 2 categories: halal, meaning permissible or lawful according to religious law, and haram, meaning forbidden or harmful. The Quran explicitly states that carrion, blood, and pork are impure. Here, pork is specifically listed alongside carrion and blood, emphasizing its particular uncleanliness. From this, it is evident that Islam did not invent the prohibition against eating pork, but inherited it from Jewish traditions. So why did Judaism originally forbid the consumption of pork? To understand this, we must look further back to the early polytheistic beliefs of the Semitic people. Before adopting monotheism, the Semitic people practiced a form of primitive polytheism, incorporating influences from Greek and Egyptian pantheons. These early beliefs were accompanied by a myriad of dietary and behavioral taboos, such as the rule that only men could eat grain. Semitic women were forbidden to ride livestock, and the prohibition against eating pork. These restrictions were ancient, predating even Abraham. As early as the 5th century BC, 1,200 years before the advent of Islam, the Greek historian Herodotus documented that many peoples of Western Asia and North Africa avoided eating pork. The Semitic people neither used pigs in their religious sacrifices, nor raised or consumed them. Why was this the case? In their polytheistic belief systems, pigs symbolized the base values of agricultural civilizations. For the nomadic Semitic people, whose livelihoods depended on herding, pigs were unsuitable livestock. In contrast, pigs were highly compatible with settled agricultural societies. To agrarian communities, pigs were the ideal domesticated animal. They were omnivorous, adaptable to various environments, easy to fatten, and even helped with tasks like trampling seeds into the soil. Although pigs were considered dirty and prone to incest, they were undeniably valuable to agricultural societies. However, to the nomadic Semitic people, pigs became a symbol of the settled agrarian lifestyle they rejected. Their disdain for sedentary farming cultures transferred onto pigs, making the animal an object of cultural taboo. In this sense, the Semitic prohibition against eating pork can be understood as a defense against and rejection of the agricultural way of life. This cultural aversion extended beyond the Semitic people. Across the vast regions from Egypt to Libya, pastoralist societies who relied on livestock and dairy products also avoided pork. Even in northern China, Mongols and Turkic peoples, long before converting to Islam, harbored taboos against eating pork. To these nomadic groups, pigs symbolized the settled agrarian lifestyle they disdained. Yet, history played a cruel irony. Around 2000 BC, desertification of the steppes in Western Asia forced some Semitic groups, including the Hebrews, to adopt agriculture. Abraham's ancestor Terah led his family from Ur in Sumer southward toward Canaan, but stopped halfway in Haran. According to Jewish tradition, the Hebrews formed a covenant with God, designating Canaan as the Promised Land. From a practical perspective, however, the deteriorating grassland environment compelled the Hebrews to settle and farm, potentially even raising pigs. Had events unfolded smoothly, they might have been assimilated into Egyptian culture. But another Semitic incursion, the rise of the Hyksos, pulled them back into the anti-pork alliance. In the 17th century BC, the Hyksos, another Semitic group, launched a massive invasion of Egypt. They enlisted the help of the Hebrews, who were then engaged in agricultural work within Egypt as collaborators and guides. The Hebrews thus participated in the conquest of Egypt and even ascended to positions of power, with figures like Joseph rising to the rank of vizier. However, they did not foresee the repercussions that would follow. Around 1530 BC, Pharaoh Ahmose I expelled the Hyksos. In the aftermath, he enacted brutal retribution against the Hebrews for aiding the invaders. This marked the beginning of the Hebrews' enslavement and their enduring hatred for Egypt. This animosity further strengthened their rejection of Egypt's agrarian symbol, the pig. After all, Egypt, one of the world's oldest agrarian civilizations, held pigs in high regard. From the pre-dynastic period to the later pharaonic era, pigs were reared by both commoners and temples for consumption or ritual offerings. For instance, during the early New Kingdom, Reneni, the high priestess of the goddess Nekhbet, owned 1,500 pigs. Pharaoh Amenhotep III of the 18th dynasty offered 1,000 pigs and 1,000 piglets to the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. Even Seti I of the 19th dynasty kept pigs in the Temple of Osiris at Abydos. When Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt, they encountered a society that revered pigs at its cultural and religious peak. The Hebrews likely projected their resentment onto Egypt's most symbolic animal, the pig. Refusing to eat pork thus became a marker of resistance against Egypt and a defining feature of Hebrew identity. Later, during the Hellenistic period, Egyptians themselves began to develop aversions to pigs, but this was centuries after the Exodus. It is clear that the prohibition against eating pork was formally codified into Jewish law when Moses founded Judaism, transforming it into a religious custom. However, the historical roots of this practice have largely faded from collective memory. What truly cemented pork as an absolute taboo was the emergence of Islam in the 7th century AD. In 610 AD, Muhammad, then 40 years old, received revelations from the archangel Gabriel, during a period of contemplation. These revelations, which would form the Quran, marked the birth of Islam. Preaching the worship of Allah as the one true God, Islam challenged the polytheistic traditions that dominated the Arabian Peninsula. This provoked hostility from the established priestly class, leading to the persecution and exile of many Muslims. In 622 AD, Muhammad left Mecca and migrated to Medina, an event known as the Hijra. After enduring brutal oppression, Muhammad resolved to reshape Islam into a powerful theocratic organization modeled after the militaristic ethos of Judaism. To unite his followers, he sought to establish absolute authority. One of the most effective tools for achieving this was the test of obedience. In Judaism, Moses used circumcision to identify those who fully submitted to his leadership. In Islam, Muhammad went further by embedding obedience tests into daily life, which gave rise to Islamic law, known as Sharia. Sharia uses detailed regulations to assess a Muslim's loyalty, with one of the most visible practices being the 5 daily prayers: Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. These prayers act as a daily affirmation of faith and submission. Another prominent test of obedience is the prohibition against eating pork. For the traditionally Semitic Arabs, pigs were already considered impure. However, by the 7th century, due to the Arabian Peninsula's extensive trade networks, pork had become a luxury food for some of the local aristocracy. By banning pork, Muhammad delivered a dual political message. First, it symbolized opposition to the decadent Arab nobility who had persecuted early Muslims, branding them as corrupt and deserving of overthrow. Second, it served as a test of absolute obedience within the Muslim community. Rejecting pork became a red line of faith, proof of true allegiance to Allah. Just as Judaism uses circumcision as a marker of identity, Islam demonstrates its distinction in certain contexts through dietary discipline. By the time of Muhammad's passing in 632 AD, the prohibition against pork had become deeply ingrained. Successive caliphs continued to enforce and expand these laws during Islam's conquests. Under the second caliph, Umar, North Africa was brought under Islamic rule. The third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, destroyed the Sasanian Persian Empire. By 661 AD, Islam had spread from North Africa to the Middle East. Across this vast region, the recitation of the Quran resonated, and pork was systematically removed from the dietary practices of conquered peoples. Even the Persians, renowned for their pork-based cuisine, were compelled to abandon these culinary traditions. In modern times, Islam's prohibition against eating pork is often explained through religious doctrine, which describes pigs as promiscuous, impure, and ugly, creatures detested by Allah. But if pigs are truly so detestable, why did Allah create them in the first place? This seemingly simple logical paradox is often overlooked by the faithful. If pigs were entirely without value, why do so many cultures today rely on them as a primary source of protein?